Hello and welcome to Slow Sleep Stories. Tonight's tale is called The Ice Cream Cart That Wandered the Desert. It follows the gentle, slow-moving adventures of a quiet man named Emilio and his stubborn, squeaky-wheeled ice cream cart as they search for the perfect place to share sweetness in the heat of New Mexico. Thanks. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's start this journey together tonight. Asterisk, a warm wind in Arroyo Azul begins the tale in the small, sun-baked village of Arroyo Azul. Mornings moved slowly, as if the air itself was reluctant to rise. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional flap of laundry on a line, or the low hum of cicadas already warming up for their long desert song. It was the kind of place where the sand knew everyone by name, and the shadows took their time sliding off the rooftops. Emilio, a quiet man with a long nose and a pair of shoes that squeaked even when he stood still, stood next to his beloved ice cream cart. It was painted a faded turquoise, chipped in all the places a cart naturally chipped around the corners, the hinges, the little bell that never quite rang right. His cart didn't have a name, though Emilio had once considered calling it Dolores after his aunt, who had a similar tendency to wander off when you weren't looking. He leaned into the shade of his porch, squinting up at the sky, which today looked especially bright and slightly suspicious. The wind, soft but persistent, tugged at his hat, flipping up one corner like it was trying to wink. "Not today," Emilio muttered gently. Tapping the brim back down, he spent the next half hour preparing his daily flavors: cinnamon, mango, honey lime, coconut whisper, which was mostly just coconut, but with the smallest drop of vanilla, and of course, peach sorbet, everyone's favorite. He packed them carefully into the cold compartment of the cart, humming a tune no one had heard, but everyone found oddly familiar. The cart creaked approvingly. Around 10 a.m., Emilio wheeled it into the center of Arroyo Azul, down the sleepy main street where chickens sometimes outnumbered people and one of the lampposts still had Christmas lights from 3 years ago. He parked beside the dusty town fountain, its water lazily burbling like it, too, needed a nap. He served exactly 3 customers that morning: an elderly woman who wanted something less cold, but still cold, a sleepy child who pointed to every flavor before settling on plain ice, and a bearded man named Marco who paid in buttons again. It was, by all accounts, a perfectly normal day until Emilio decided to take a short nap. He moved the cart under a shade tree that leaned like it had secrets, kicked off his shoes, and propped his back against its trunk. The wind whispered through the leaves above, him, cool and calm and utterly innocent. That's when things got strange. At first, Emilio thought he was dreaming. He heard the wheels of his cart squeak once, then twice. He opened one eye and saw nothing. The cart was right where he left it. He dozed again. A minute later, there was another squeak. This time both eyes opened and the cart was gone now. When Emilio panicked, he did it slowly. He stood up without shouting, brushed the sand from his pants, slipped back into his shoes, which made a surprisingly loud honk today, and looked left, then right. "Cart?" he asked. No response. Therein, the sand, were fresh cart tracks, thin and meandering like a goose on a mission. They led out of the plaza, past Senator Alvarez's bookstore/laundry, and into the wider desert beyond. Emilio sighed, not out of anger, but because sighing was a tradition in his family when anything slightly inconvenient happened. His mother had once sighed so loudly at a broken egg, she accidentally blew it off the table. He picked up his little hand, bell still not ringing. Right hand began his slow, squeaky pursuit. As he walked, he called softly into the air, Cart, you. Come back now. You've got all the peach sorbet, and I don't want another letter from the mayor about that again. The sun rose higher, the wind picked up just slightly, and somewhere, far ahead, a squeaky wheel gave a giggle. It was going to be one of those days. The desert opened up in front of him, like a quiet stage, dry brush, golden sand, occasional cacti standing like confused dancers. The wind wasn't loud, but it had rhythm, tickling the backs of Emilio's knees and flapping his collar. The sound of the breeze, the hush of sand moving, the creak of his footsteps, these all blended into the sleepy symphony of Arroyo Azul's quiet drama behind him. The town resumed its nap. Chickens cooed and shuffled. A dog gave a half-hearted bark before rolling over. Emilio's bell gave one half ring when he tripped slightly over a rock shaped exactly like a shoe. He looked at it, mildly betrayed. "You're lucky I'm not superstitious," he told the rock, and kept walking. Emilio followed the tracks for an hour, pausing only to inspect a curious footprint that looked suspiciously like a duck wearing boots. The desert was warm but not cruel today, and that made it easier. Overhead, a hawk circled, probably wondering what kind of ice cream a man would carry alone into the middle of nowhere. And still, the tracks continued. By midday, Emilio found a bent road sign pointing in the direction of somewhere and a wooden bench that hadn't seen a sitter in decades. He sat and pulled a slightly soggy ice cream cone from his pocket. He always carried a spare for emergencies, and licked thoughtfully. Then he smiled. The wind whooshed gently past, nudging his shoulder like an old friend, saying, "Keep going, Emilio. The cart's not done with you yet." He stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and followed the next bend in the tracks. The cart rolls away with a mind of its own. Emilio wasn't one for wild theories. He didn't believe in ghosts. He wasn't particularly fond of mysteries. And he once spent 3 years denying that the town goat could open doors, even after it opened his. But as he trudged along the ever-wiggling trail of cart tracks in the soft sand, he began to consider, just a little, that perhaps his cart had developed ideas. It wasn't just the tracks themselves, those swervy, looping patterns that no normal wheeled cart should make. It was the way the desert seemed to cooperate. The wind had blown just enough to brush the tracks clean behind him, but never ahead. The path seemed to wait for him, always. Somewhere in the distance, he heard a long squeak, high-pitched and slightly cheeky. "I knew I shouldn't have oiled the wheels," Emilio muttered. The desert began to change as he walked. What was once a flat stretch of sand and sleepy brush now grew into little hills, each one just tall enough to be annoying. Emilio climbed them with the enthusiasm of a man trying to remember why he didn't just sell lemonade instead. He came to a rise where the sand gathered like spilled flour, and paused to catch his breath. Below, nestled between 2 sand-colored boulders, was a shape, a familiar, faded turquoise shape. His cart, and it was moving. He blinked. It wasn't rolling fast, just ... gently coasting forward, like it had somewhere to be, and wasn't in a hurry. There wasn't a slope to speak of, and no one seemed to be pushing it. The cart simply trundled forward on its own, squeaking as it went. The little bell at the top now ringing softly as if to say, "Hello again, Emilio. Try to keep up." He picked up the pace, slipping a little on the loose sand, waving his arms. "Stop right there. I have cinnamon mango in you. You're not even refrigerated properly anymore." The cart gave a lurch and turned slightly left, like a polite dog trying to ignore a very embarrassing owner. Emilio groaned, partly from exertion and partly because his left shoe had started making a noise like a duck hiccuping. The sun beat down softly, not cruel, but insistent, Emilio pulled his hat lower, grumbling. He passed a trio of lizards, sunbathing on a flat stone. One of them seemed to raise an eyebrow. "Don't you start," he said to them, and then, just as suddenly as it began, the cart stopped. It sat in a shallow dip in the sand, beside a large saguaro cactus with a single, blooming yellow flower. The wind curled around it like a cat, quiet and almost pleased with itself. Emilio approached cautiously, like he was greeting someone who had just been caught stealing jam. "You all right?" he asked the cart. It said nothing, of course, but the bell gave a soft ting, and one of the sticky wheels made a contented squeak. The cart was warm to the touch, not too warm but enough to make Emilio cringe. He popped open the lid and peered inside. The peach sorbet had melted into a puddle, and the coconut whisper had turned into coconut mumble. He sighed. "Well, that's tomorrow's problem." He pulled out the honey lime tub, which had mostly survived, and scooped out a small spoonful. It tasted like summer and dreams of lemonade. He plopped down in the sand beside his cart and stared up at the sky, where clouds drifted like bored marshmallows. "You really had me going, you know," he told the cart. It said nothing, but one wheel settled an inch deeper into the sand, like it was trying to get comfortable. Then Emilio noticed something odd. In the sand, just beyond the cart, were other tracks not from the cart, and not from him. These were smaller footprints, shaped like a child's. They led in a zigzag, loop-to-loop pattern around the cactus and away into the deeper desert. Emilio leaned forward, curious. He hadn't seen another soul out here, yet here were steps, light and dancing. Whoever it was had clearly been playing, or maybe leading me somewhere, he muttered, his voice thoughtful. He looked back at his cart. "You've been making friends, without me." The cart declined to answer. He stood up, brushed the sand from his knees, and took another bite of the honey lime. He let it melt on his tongue as he stared out in the direction of the footprints. There was something comforting about the silence of the desert, not empty, just slow. Every sound took its time, and every shadow stretched lazily before deciding where to fall. Emilio felt the quiet settle over him like a soft blanket. Just then, something sticky landed on his foot. He looked down. A scoop of peach sorbet, heroic to the end, had leaped from the open cart lid in one final act of rebellion. He laughed, the kind of soft, surprised laugh that only comes when your socks are full of dessert. "Well," he said, wiping his foot on a patch of desert grass, "I suppose we're committed now." He followed the child-sized footprints, dragging the cart behind him once again. It didn't resist this time. In fact, it rolled smoothly, as if it, too, was curious about who had passed this way. The wind picked up slightly, brushing across the back of Emilio's neck like a friend leaning in to whisper, "Just a little further," as he rounded a bend near a craggy rock shaped like a giant's elbow. Emilio caught sight of something in the distance, a cluster of cacti standing in a circle, with something bright wedged between them. He quickened his pace. The cart followed. Now quiet, a jackrabbit bounded across the path ahead, paused, and looked back at Emilio. Its nose twitched in judgment before it vanished into the brush. He ignored it. He was used to that look. What he wasn't used to was the feeling that, just maybe, his day was about to get even stranger. Desert critters and sticky melting flavors. The desert opened wider as Emilio pushed the cart deeper into the sun-bleached unknown. The wind had eased, the sand had softened, and everything seemed to pause. Even the lizards, usually skittering, like impatient waiters, just sat and blinked. The child-sized footprints ahead began to wander. One moment they were looping around boulders, the next they were skipping in tight circles, like whoever made them had found something funny. Emilio followed them with the same patient determination he once used to fix his cousin's accordion, using only duct tape and optimism as he walked. The sun climbed higher, making the ice cream inside the cart behave less like dessert and more like a suggestion. He checked the tubs once more. The cinnamon mango had turned into a puddle of spicy syrup. Coconut Whisper had finally given up and become coconut soup. Only the honey lime held its shape, clinging to dignity like a dog wearing shoes. Poor things, Emilio muttered. You never stood a chance. He pulled out a sticky spoon and helped himself to the last good scoop of honey lime. The spoon squeaked against the plastic, and somewhere in the distance, something chirped. Not a bird exactly, but not a bird either. Then, from the side of a large, lumpy boulder, a pair of eyes peeked out, wide, curious, fuzzy. Hello, Emilio said softly. A creature emerged. It was roundish, with a tail too big for its body and ears like tiny umbrellas. A desert coati. It padded up to him, sniffed the cart, and made a small wheezing noise that Emilio chose to interpret as polite interest. Sorry, friend, no meat popsicles. The coati sniffed again, then looked directly at the peach sorbet puddle, leaking gently. From the cart's corner, with one swift motion, it dabbed its paw in the mess and licked it thoughtfully. The expression that followed was one of revelation. Right, Emilio said, smiling. That batch had extra cardamom. The coati made a satisfied squeak, then darted off into the cactus shadows, its tail bouncing behind like a flag of approval. The encounter left Emilio oddly buoyant. It wasn't every day your dessert got coati endorsed. He kept following the footprints, which had now joined a new set of track-steeny claw marks, like a lizard parade. The two trails wove around each other, playful and aimless. Emilio imagined a child skipping beside a line of cooperative reptiles, chatting about ice, cream and sandcastles. He sighed. Maybe it's just heat playing games. Or maybe, a small voice inside him offered, maybe something wonderful was happening. Just then, a particularly strong gust of wind rushed through the nearby scrub. The cart's bell gave a half-hearted ding, and something colorful fluttered across Emilio's path. He bent down to pick it up, a small paper napkin, decorated with cartoon cacti wearing sunglasses. Scrawled across the back, in pencil and slightly smudged, was a child's handwriting. If you find the turtle, you're almost there. Emilio tilted his head. The turtle, he asked the sky. The sky, ever enigmatic, offered no clarification. Well, he muttered, it wouldn't be the strangest thing that's happened today. As if on cue, the cart gave a gentle creak behind him. Emilio glanced back. The honey lime tub had fallen over, sending the last of its contents slowly dripping onto the desert floor. He sighed, pulled a tissue from his pocket, and dabbed the mess up as best he could. That's when he saw the ants. A parade of them, thin, shiny, and very, very organized, were marching straight toward the sticky spot. Emilio watched them for a moment. The line was so precise it could have been drawn with a ruler and a ruler's slightly more responsible cousin. He stepped back, not wanting to interrupt their pilgrimage, and let the moment pass in silence. Further ahead, the landscape shifted again. Now it looked more like a watercolor painting, brushes of pale green cactus, tufts of yellow wildflowers, and a bright splash of purple where some stubborn desert lavender bloomed defiantly. Emilio's cart squeaked contentedly as they passed. Then, he saw it, off to the left, nestled between two rocks and half buried in sand, was a large stone shaped, unmistakably, like a turtle's shell. It had a face carved into its miling gently, like it knew secret sand, a painted arrow pointing off the main path. Next to it, a small, tattered backpack leaned against the rock. Emilio stopped. His heart did a tiny skip knot in panic, just something between curiosity and concern. He picked up the backpack and unzipped it slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a plastic spoon, and a notebook titled Important Ice Cream Research. He opened the notebook. It was filled with flavor ideas: prickly pear, popsicle, cinnamon, cactus, swirl, moondust, mint lizard, lime. Only a joke. There were doodles too. A smiling ice cream cone wearing sunglasses. A child riding an ice cream cart like a chariot. A son with a mustache. Emilio smiled and shook his head. Looks like I'm not the only one chasing sweetness today. He carefully placed the notebook back in the bag, slung it over his shoulder, and turned to follow the arrow. The wind pushed gently behind him. His cart, now lighter in both weight and dignity, squeaked a little happier as they moved forward, and the desert somehow felt less empty. Just before the next bend, Emilio paused and turned back. The turtle-shaped rock sat there, solid and smiling. Beside it, a hummingbird hovered, looked at him like it was grading his outfit, then zipped away. He chuckled. That's one joke. As he turned back to the path, the wind ruffled his shirt collar, and the bell on the cart gave a second, faint ding like it had just gotten the joke, too. A dusty town appears where none should. Beatty Trail curved slowly through a shallow canyon, where the walls rose in lazy swirls of sun-warmed stone. Emilio walked in rhythm with the squeak of his cart, the desert silence broken only by an occasional cactus wren belting out a solo like it had something to prove. The footprints were still there, now joined by little spirals that looked suspiciously like dance steps. Emilio paused and considered it. Whoever you are, he said to the air, you've got fancy feet. The wind tugged gently at his shirt, like a child tugging at a sleeve. Up ahead, the canyon opened, and something shimmered in the light. Squinted. There, at the far end of the dusty plain, was a town. Not a modern one, not with blinking lights and cars and soda machines. This town looked like someone had poured a handful of old postcards onto the earth and just let them take root. Wooden buildings stood crookedly but proudly, their paint peeling like old sunburn. A faded sign arched over the entrance, the letters barely legible: Benvenidos, a pueblo somnoliento. Emilio read it twice. Welcome to Sleepytown, he said aloud. Then, sure, why not? He stepped through the archway and onto the main street. His shoes made little crunch sounds on the gravel, and the cart's bell let out a faint ting, as if tipping its hat to whoever might be watching. But there was no one there, no voices, no footsteps, just buildings, a saloon with doors that swung slightly in the breeze, a post office with a mailbox that looked suspiciously well fed, and a bakery with faded lettering that read pan dulce and occasional pies. Emilio paused in front of the bakery and peered through the dusty window. Inside, a display case sat empty except for a single cinnamon roll, fossilized in sugar and memory. That roll's been here longer than I've been alive, he muttered. The air shimmered again, just slightly, and he turned to find a bench outside the general store. It was occupied by a statue, or at least he thought it was a statue until it blinked. It was a man, or a scarecrow, or perhaps something in between. He wore a wide hat, his boots were mismatched, and his mustache had aspirations of flight. Emilio cleared his throat. Afternoon. The man's statue tilted his head slowly. You brought peach? Emilio blinked. I did. The man nodded, deeply satisfied, then returned to his staring. Right then, Emilio said, wheeling his cart a little faster. As he passed the old barber shop, a wind chime made of spoons and bottle caps tinkled gently. The sound was oddly melodic, and the cart's wheels seemed to fall into rhythm with it, almost dancing across the road. At the far end of the street, a building caught his eye. It looked newer than the rest, less dusty, with a fresh coat of teal paint and a hand-painted sign that read, La Casa de los Sabores Pedazos, the House of Lost Flavors. Emilio stepped closer. The door was ajar, and inside, the air was cool, not from any air conditioning. No wires ran into the building, but from something else, something older. He walked in, and the door shut softly behind him. Shelves lined the walls, each stacked with rows of glass jars. Some were labeled rosewater, vanilla, cracked pepper, caramel, ghost marshmallow. Others had only symbols: tiny suns, crescent moons. A pair of shoes. At the center of the room stood a round table with a single bowl on it. It was filled with perfectly scooped spheres of color. No melting, no drips, just waiting. Emilio leaned over and sniffed. One scoop smelled like old books and oranges, another like campfire and laughter. He didn't touch any of it. Something about the room suggested ... patience. Just then, from a small doorway behind the table, a child appeared. She looked to be about 7, with a mop of curly hair, a shirt too big for her, and a plastic crown perched sideways on her head. She looked up at Emilio and grinned. "You're late," she said. Emilio raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't aware I had an appointment." The girl nodded solemnly. "Everyone comes here eventually, but usually they bring the good stuff." "I brought cinnamon mango," he offered. She tilted her head. "That is the good stuff," he chuckled. "Thought so." She walked up to the cart and peered inside. "You lost most of it." "I didn't lose it. The desert tasted it." She laughed, a bright, bubbling sound that seemed to fill the dusty air like sunlight. "You're funny," she said, "for a grown-up." "High praise," Emilio replied. "You, the one who left the footprints." She shrugged. Maybe it was the ice cream fairy." "Does she also steal carts?" "No," the girl said thoughtfully. "But sometimes she borrows them. They roll better than shoes." That was fair. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something shiny. A spoon. The same spoon he'd seen in the backpack. "Come on," she said, motioning to a second doorway. "It's almost time." "For what?" She paused, then smiled again. "For you to remember." The room beyond was glowing softly. The walls pulsed with pale color, like someone had melted a rainbow into warm milk. Emilio followed, his cart rolling gently behind him as he stepped into the glow. The girl turned back. "I like your hat," she said. "Thanks," Emilio replied. "It keeps the sun from hearing my thoughts." She laughed again. That was joke number 2. The museum of flavors that never caught on. The room Emilio stepped into was circular, soft-lit, and somehow quiet in a way that made sound itself feel optional. The walls were lined with glass cases, each holding something strange, beautiful, or downright baffling. It was like stepping into a dream curated by a chef who had once dropped their cookbook in a bathtub of glitter. The girl, still wearing her sideways crown, stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, like a tour guide who had rehearsed everything but still planned to wing it. "Welcome," she said grandly, "to the Museum of Flavors that never caught on." Emilio looked around. "You run a museum?" She nodded. "Yep, it's open sometimes, usually when people need it." He approached the nearest case. Inside was a pint labeled garlic rainbow swirl. The label had a unicorn on it, but the unicorn looked nervous. "Was this popular?" he asked. The girl scrunched her nose. "Only with one guy in Tucson and his parrot." Another case displayed pickle buttercream, fizzy grape mustard, and something ominously labeled just shrimp. Emilio blinked. You're really pushing the boundary of what should be frozen, she grinned. That's the point. This is where the forgotten flavors go. The ones people made with love, even if they only tasted them once. He stood silently for a moment, looking around. There was a kind of reverence in the air. Like each flavor, no matter how bizarre, held a memory. Then he saw it. At the far end of the room, slightly askew in its case, was a tub of ice cream labeled, in neat handwriting, Emilio's first try, pineapple dust and vanilla dreams. He stared at it. The label looked like something he had scribbled on a sticky note when he was 15, working late in his uncle's tiny kitchen. He had made that flavor with too much ambition and not enough refrigeration. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. The girl shrugged. It was here before me. Maybe you brought it. He turned slowly, taking in the rows of forgotten scoops. So this place remembers everything. She nodded. Only the sweet things, even the ones that didn't quite work. There was silence between them for a while. Emilio walked past a section labeled Daydream Flavors, where scoops hovered slightly above their bowls. One sparkled like glittery popcorn. Another smelled like the inside of a warm coat. He chuckled. This one smells like my abuela's pantry. The girl leaned against the cart. That means it worked. Emilio looked at her, brow furrowed. What do you mean? She tapped the cart gently. You came looking for someone, but you're finding a lot more, huh? He nodded slowly. The girl looked up at one case where a bright blue flavor shimmered inside a glass dome. My favorite is Moonberry Nightfall, she said. It tastes like secrets you forgot on purpose. Emilio blinked. That's oddly specific. So is ice cream, she said. She skipped ahead, stopping at a door made of old freezer doors patched together like a quilt. She pushed it open, with her shoulder revealing a warm, flickering glow beyond. Time to go upstairs, she said. Emilio hesitated. Museums don't usually have upstairs. This one does, she said, but only when someone needs a roof. The stairs creaked in a friendly way as he followed her up, and the smell changed like roasted cinnamon, library books, and something very much like birthday cake. When he reached the top, he stopped. It was a kitchen, not a grand one, a cozy, sun-warmed room with checkered curtains and chipped mugs. An ice cream maker sat humming quietly on the counter, and a window overlooked an impossible garden of herbs and blooming fruit. The girl climbed onto a stool and gestured at a recipe book that lay open on the table. This was yours, she said. Sort of. Emilio stepped closer. The handwriting wasn't his, but it was familiar, like something he'd seen in a dream. The recipe was for cactus fruit and lemon drift. It had notes in the margins: to sour last time. Try more, son. Add a story. Don't forget to smile while mixing. Emilio let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The girl rummaged in a drawer and pulled out a scoop, polished it with her sleeve, and handed it to him. "Want to try again?" she asked. He looked at the machine, the ingredients, the whole strange, quiet town beneath the floor. Then he nodded. They worked side by side, mixing prickly pear syrup with cream, zesting lemon with exaggerated seriousness, and laughing when the machine made a noise like a contented burro, as it churned. The girl hummed, something tuneless but cozy. Emilio found himself tapping his fingers in time. When the ice cream was done, he scooped out a small curl of pink and yellow and tasted it. It was perfect. Or rather, it wasn't perfect, but it felt perfect. The girl beamed. "You remembered what?" he asked. She reached up and tapped his chest. "Why you started." He sat down, the scoop still in hand, and looked out the window at the garden that shouldn't exist. Then he said, almost to himself, I just wanted people to feel better. To laugh, to remember something sweet. The girl nodded. Then you're almost ready. For what? She grinned. For the rest. That was the third joke. But he still didn't know if she was kidding. The night market that waited for dreams when Emilio opened the back door of the strange upstairs kitchen. He expected another shimmering desert path, maybe more mirages and poetic wind. Instead, he stepped directly into a market. Not a grocery store or a flea market. This was something different. It was like a festival and a memory, and a bedtime story had all collided gently and decided to stay for dinner. The market stretched in winding lantern-lit rows. The night had arrived, but it wasn't the kind of night that made things vanish. It was the kind that made everything glow. Stalls were tucked under bright canopies, and old trees draped in tiny lights. Strings of paper butterflies fluttered overhead, and the air smelled like tamales, toasted coconut, and curiosity. The girl with the crown skipped ahead, weaving between sleepy-looking shoppers, calling over her shoulder, "Come on, you've got the cart, remember?" "Right, the cart." Emilio looked down, surprised to see it still faithfully rolling beside him. It had cleaned itself somehow. The wheels looked freshly oiled. The bell gave a cheerful ting. He followed her everywhere. People milled about, but not in a rush. This was a crowd of unhurried hearts. Grandparents sipped tiny mugs of something spiced and fizzy. A boy in a cape bought a glowing lollipop from a stand labeled Dream Fuel. An old man played a soft accordion tune that somehow made Emilio remember the smell of rain on hot pavement as they passed a stall decorated with embroidered napkins and ceramic suns. A woman waved at Emilio. "Hey, ice cream man," she said. "You got the peach." He blinked eyes. "I have peach, you owe me one." She grinned. "From that time, I didn't cry at my cousin's wedding." "That's specific," he said. She winked. "So is peach." They moved on. The girl danced from stall to stall, pointing things out. A pile of dream journals, written in invisible ink. A llama selling chilled tea out of a velvet pouch. A magician who turned worries into soft lint and gently blew them away. At the center of the market was a large, round stall made of old window panes and draped in glowing ribbon. A painted sign read, "One scoop equals one story." The girl stopped in front of it and turned to Emilio. "This is yours tonight, my what?" She gestured at the cart. "You've got stories in there. You've been collecting them all day." He looked down. The cart's glass case shimmered softly, like it was filled with frozen lanterns. Each flavor pulsed faintly: cinnamon, mango, vanilla, cactus, lime. Laughter swirl. A crowd was already forming. First, a man with a dog and a worried brow. Then, a pair of twin girls in pajamas with pockets full of questions. Then, a librarian who had been dreaming of blueberry sherbet since Wednesday. The girl handed Emilio a spoon. "Go ahead," she said. "Serve them. But I don't have prices or scoops for everyone." "You don't need them," she said. "People don't come here hungry. They come remembering they once were." So he scooped one for the man and his dog. And Sage made him laugh so hard the dog barked twice, then promptly sat down like it had just solved a problem. One for the twins, grape, fizz, and marshmallow. Hush. They giggled into their sleeves and whispered something about cloud pirates. One for the librarian, something deep and purpley and warm. She closed her eyes and whispered, "This tastes like forgiveness." Emilio worked slowly, carefully. Each scoop a little moment of attention, each smile like a thank you note from the night. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time at the night market wasn't a straight line. It looped and curled and made polite detours around laughter, and all the while, The girl sat on top of a nearby table, swinging her legs and watching. The crown had slipped even further sideways now, when the last scoop was served, and the crowd had wandered off. Bellies full and hearts lighter, she hopped down and walked over. "You did good," she said. "I'm not sure what this all was," he admitted. She looked up at the sky, where paper lanterns drifted like sleepy stars. "This was you finding the story again," she said. Emilio nodded. "I think I needed that." She handed him the spoon. "Most people do." Then she pointed. Behind him there, where the stall had once stood, was now a wide desert path under a ribbon of moonlight. "You going?" she asked. "I think I am." "Don't forget to look behind you sometimes," she said. "But don't stop walking." He started down the path, the cart trailing behind like a well-behaved puppy. The market lights dimmed gently as he walked, the sounds fading like a lullaby. Someone was softly tucking under a pillow. Just before the path curved out of sight, he turned, that the girl waved. Her crown slipped entirely off, and she caught it mid-air, laughing. That was the first sound to follow him down the moonlit trail. The sleepy cactus who knew all the endings. The desert opened again, wide and quiet and full of stars. Emilio walked steadily now, his cart rolling beside him like it had made peace with the road. The wind was softer here, a kind of hush that only happens after you've been properly listened to. Ahead, something glowed, not a light, exactly, more like a presence. As he drew closer, he saw it, a single cactus stall, stately and very much alive in a way that didn't make sense. It was nestled in a circle of rocks, and someone had given it a knit hat. It wore it proudly. "Evening," said a voice, slow and warm. Emilio blinked. Did the cactus just speak? The cactus sighed gently. "People always sound surprised. I don't blame them. There are very few speaking plants in the desert world." "Don't you mean the desert world?" A pause. Then the cactus chuckled. "No, I meant what I said. Desert world. You've been in it all day, haven't you?" Emilio smiled. "I guess I have." "Good. Then I can assume your taste buds are open, and your heart is, at the very least, defrosting." The wind blew gently through the cactus spines, making a whispery hum like a lullaby being hummed through a comb. "Why are you here?" Emilio asked. "To remind you," said the cactus, "that endings are important, but they don't always mean goodbye." It leaned slightly impossible, yet cozy. "You're almost back, Emilio. Back to where you started. But not quite the same." Emilio knelt beside it, and the cactus continued. "People think stories end when they finish telling them, but that's just when they become part of someone else. You've been handing out endings all night." He thought about the librarian, the twins, the man with the dog. "You're saying I've been helping people finish something, sometimes, or start something," said the cactus. "Or just sit in the middle, with a scoop of forgiveness, and let the world be sweet for a minute." The stars shimmered gently above. A breeze carried the scent of vanilla and thyme. The cactus hummed again. "Want to know how your story ends?" Emilio hesitated, then nodded. The cactus didn't answer with words. Instead, its needles began to glow, and soft pictures formed in the air like a projector made of moonlight. He saw himself back in his uncle's shop. Only it wasn't dusty and forgotten. It was bright, filled with neighbors and children, music playing quietly on a loop. There were jars of homemade toppings, scoops flying like choreography, and someone laughing near the window. It was him, and there was the girl, her crown now planted in a pot beside the register, grinning like she'd known this would happen. "You're going to remember how to belong," the cactus said softly. Emilio swallowed a lump in his throat. "But more than that," it continued, You'll help other people feel like they do too. He looked up. That's a lot for one scoop of ice cream. The cactus shook gently. That's the thing about ice cream. It's never just ice cream. It's memory, celebration, a sigh on a hot day, a story, frozen and waiting to be told again. Emilio stood, placing a hand gently against the cactus side. Thank you, he said. Thank you, it replied. Now go rest. Morning's not far now. He turned and began walking again. The stars stretched above him like stitches in a very kind sky. His footsteps made soft crunches in the sand, and each one seemed to echo something from earlier, a laugh, a promise, a gentle joke. When he crested the last small hill, he saw the town below, the one he'd left. It was still sleepy, still full of potholes and squeaky porch swings, but the street lamps twinkled with more warmth than he remembered. A familiar hum came from the kitchen window of his uncle's house. He stood there for a moment, the cart resting beside him like an old friend who didn't need to speak. Then, without thinking, he reached into the cart and pulled out the last scoop. It was unnamed, but he knew what it was. He let it melt in his mouth, soft, bittersweet, and filled with quiet light. Then he started walking home. The street lamp that stayed on just for him, the path narrowed gently, then turned into gravel, then sidewalk. Emilio's shoes clacked softly as he passed the empty park bench near the bus stop, the cracked corner where the bakery once stood, the mural of the dancing bear someone had painted. Back in high school, everything was just as he remembered, and nothing was. The town was asleep, mostly. Windows blinked with the last blue light of television shows, murmuring themselves into dreams. A lone cat trotted across the road like it had a secret meeting with a lamppost. The breeze carried distant notes of someone's wind chimes playing, a tune that sounded like yesterday. Emilio paused beneath a flickering street lamp, the one that had always flickered. It buzzed softly, and he smiled at it. I'm back, he whispered. The lamp blinked once, then steadied. For once, it didn't flicker. The cart hummed quietly beside him, almost like it was listening to. Its one swabbly wheel now turned in smooth circles, steady and calm. The bell gave a single, sleepy ting, unprompted. As Emilio passed Mrs. Delgado's house, he noticed a sticky note still hanging on her mailbox. She always left notes for the mailman, little reminders about coupons and forgotten birthdays. But this one was different. It read, "Don't forget to be kind to yourself." Then, in smaller handwriting, also, "Emilio makes the best strawberry." He blinked at that. How did she know? The house was quiet, but he imagined her in there, curled up in a chair, maybe sipping something warm and thinking about her late husband, who always wore 2 different socks on purpose. When he reached the shop, his uncle's old ice cream parlor, the porch light was on. Not a big deal, except no one had turned it on in over a year. Emilio had left the keys on the counter and hadn't looked back. Now, there was a small potted plant by the front door, and taped to the glass, a note, "Open me when you're ready." He stood there for a long moment, fingers brushing the brass handle. Behind him, the town exhaled. The wind passed through the empty streets, soft and low, like it didn't want to wake anyone. A single tumbleweed rolled by politely, and somewhere, a dog snored with commitment. Then, as if he'd always known he would, Emilio unlocked the door. The shop was dusty, but only a little. The stools were still crooked. The freezer still squeaked when it opened, and the old jukebox in the corner blinked with just enough energy to play one last lullaby. He turned on the light. Everything yawned back to life. He opened the cart's lid and began gently unloading the remaining scoops into their proper tubs. They slid in like they'd never been gone, and the flavors shimmered quietly in the cold mango courage, lavender recall, hazelnut calm. The bell above the door jingled. Emilio turned, expecting silence, but a small girl stood there, rubbing her eyes. "Hi," she said. "Are you the dream guy?" He blinked. Maybe." She pulled a crumpled dollar from her coat. "I need something for falling asleep. School is loud, my brain's louder." He walked to the freezer. Carefully, he scooped a flavor he didn't recognize, but somehow trusted. It was pale blue and smelled like whispered jokes. She took a bite, smiled, and without another word, curled up in a booth and began to hum quietly to herself. The bell jingled again. A tired-looking man stepped in, holding a paper full of scribbles, and regret behind him, a nurse on her break. Then an old man with a cane shaped like a flamingo. They weren't there for the ice cream. Well, they were, but not just for that. They were there because something had been waiting for them to come home to. And Emilio. He just kept scooping softly, slowly, like he had all the time in the world. And outside, the street lamp kept its light steady, just for him. Word count, 1073, closing summary, 300 words, and so, under a sleepy street lamp, in a town that never asked for much, Emilio rediscovered something simple and kind: belonging. The wandering cart, the girl with the sideways crown, the llama who brewed chilled tea, all of it had pointed him back to the same quiet truth, that sometimes what we're looking for isn't out there in the distance. It's right where we began, waiting patiently for us to grow soft enough to notice it again. He didn't need grand adventure or glittering fame. He didn't need answers printed in big bold letters. He just needed to remember the quiet magic of making someone smile over a scoop of something sweet, of telling a story with flavor, not fanfare. Now, the parlor hums again, and maybe tonight a tired mom will sneak in for a midnight mango scoop. A restless teenager will find a quiet booth and scribble poetry between bites. Maybe a little boy will whisper, "This tastes like my grandma's kitchen," and not even understand why it matters so much. But it will matter, because the world turns quietly when we're kind to each other, when we notice, when we share our stories, and remember that most of us are just doing our best to fall asleep without too much noise. So tonight, as the flavors chill and the town dreams on, Emilio scoops another story, and another, and you're already drifting, because this isn't just a tale about an ice cream cart in the desert. It's about you and the soft, sweet endings you didn't know you deserved. Good night.